Good morning. Welcome everybody to the Fitzgerald and Partners Brexit event. I'm Cormac Fitzgerald, the managing partner of Fitzgerald and Partners. We're business advisors and accountants based here in Kinsale, and delighted to host this morning's event, which is a key event for business in the local area. Our focus is working with SMEs and entrepreneurs, and delighted with the response to this morning's event, sponsored by the Big Red Cloud, leading accounts online software that are working in conjunction with us in our business centre, which focuses on dealing with the outsourcing aspect of the people's accounts. I'd like to thank everybody for coming along to this event, and it's a great event for Kinsale and for business in the area.
Hi, my name is Mahon. I'm Managing Director of the Southern Star newspaper. Fantastic to be here today at the Blue Haven Hotel in Kinsale as part of the Breakfast Business Seminar in association with Big Red Cloud Computing, and we're delighted to be here as media partner. Kinsale is a very important area for us in terms of readership and circulation and advertising in our newspaper, and obviously this topic is so pertinent at the moment to Ireland and to the Irish, the impact it could have on the Irish economy depending on which way the referendum goes. So it's the kind of thing that we like to be right at the heart of in terms of contributing to an event like this, which gets a lot of the business leaders and politicians from the area into a room. There's a good presentation by Jim Power and a good debate both before and after the breakfast.
Hi, I'm Paraic Nolan, Director at Big Red Book and Big Red Cloud, Ireland's leading bookkeeping and accounting software for SMEs. So very happy to be here back in my home county of Cork, in Kinsale, here to support Cormac and his team at Fitzgerald and Partners for the Brexit seminar. And it's great to see a leading economist, Jim Power, here as well today to present his views on this really important topic, particularly for small businesses, a lot of whom have a lot of exports to the UK market. So it'll be interesting to see what Jim has to say today on this particular topic.
As the British electorate goes into the polls on June 23rd to vote on EU membership, if the UK decides to leave, there are potentially huge political and economic repercussions for Ireland. A Brexit would have far-reaching implications for the future of the EU, which is why we've asked Jim Power, leading economist, to come along here this morning and give his time and insight into the issues that are facing Irish business. I would also like to thank the team from the Big Red Cloud and the Big Red Book, Paraic, Catherine and Michael. The Big Red Cloud is a leading supplier of online accounts to the SME market in Ireland. Paraic is the CFO and Head of Development, and the Big Red Cloud is an Irish company supporting Irish SMEs and has done so for the last 22 years. Over 40,000 companies use their award-winning suite of products, which nicely ties into our business centre, which we are building with our team at the moment in Fitzgerald and Partners. That deals with the day-to-day administration, VAT, payroll, accounts, outsourcing for businesses, and we're working with software like the Big Red Cloud, where the client can access their data, we can access the data, and it's something we're going to be promoting to a lot of our clients as a useful solution to managing bookkeeping and accounts. You can even raise a sales invoice via an app if you have people on the road, and do it while you're travelling. Thankfully, most people don't enjoy bookkeeping and administration and prefer to focus on growing their business, which is why it suits business owners to outsource this aspect of their business, and why we have a job and why our team do it well. Our business centre, led by Christine, has seen huge growth in this service recently, and we've employed extra staff to resource this business centre, and Christine would be more than happy to discuss any requirements with you. If you'd like to see a demonstration of it afterwards, the Big Red Cloud team are here and can have a chat with you. I'd also like to thank our media partners here today, the Southern Star. Sean Mahon, the Managing Director, and his team, you're very welcome. The Southern Star not alone covers SMEs in the West Cork area, but also has superb sports coverage with over 50,000 copies a week. An ideal platform to message your business. His editor, Con Downing, is also here. You're very welcome. I'd also like to thank my team in Fitzgerald and Partners for organising this morning's event. In particular, my PA Linda Farley and our new team members who have just joined us. We've completed a full IT office upgrade, so we have the latest technology to service our clients. Please don't be shy in taking out your business cards and passing them around. Lots of introductions of business have been done here over the years by meeting up, exchanging business cards and doing business with each other. At the end of the day, we're all traders and we're all supporting local and doing business and with each other, and the highest compliment you can pay us is that of a referral. I hope you're enjoying your breakfast in the venue, which is ideal for seminars and meetings, thanks to Kieran and the Blue Haven team, who'll be more than happy to talk to you about any corporate business. Blue Haven Corporate caters for corporate barbecues, seminars, meetings, off-site, away days, and happy to accommodate your business. I'd also like to acknowledge any Chamber members here from the Kinsale Chamber of Tourism and Business, a superb organisation which is important for business and tourism in the area. And our website, kinsale.ie, receives huge volumes of traffic important for local business. Kinsale is a great town to live and work in and a great place to do business, and has some world-famous attractions, such as the world-famous Old Head Golf Links, attracting major visitor numbers, and also it's the start of the Wild Atlantic Way, which is one of the best marketing initiatives that I've seen. Well done to Tomás and his committee for chairing this great committee, and keep up the good work. We also have a great sports complex with Soilia and a massive venue which can hold events and conferences, which we may even consider for future conferences if our numbers grow. The town is also fortunate to have a great community school led by Fergal McCarthy, which is important to the local community to produce the next generation of talent. While on the topic of education, welcome to my fellow colleagues here from CPA Ireland Council. CPA Ireland is one of Ireland's leading accountancy brands and is doing great work globally with international partnerships around the world. It's a great qualification and platform for business, and there are many CPAs here in the room. And CPA does great work in the area of research and thought leadership strategy for SMEs and entrepreneurs. We have a video clip of the event on social media, as you can see, thanks to Daniel Carey, who is a social media expert. So all look your best and don't say anything you don't want it up on video later. I'd like to thank Maurice Supple from Blueshed and Daniel, who are live streaming this morning, which is a first for us. And I understand that Facebook Live is an innovative social media tool and is something new to and another dimension to bring to our events. And this live feed is going to reach 70,000 people, I'm told. There is also a Twitter competition to win a meal and aperitif, wine and tapas bar. So get tweeting and include the hashtag Brexit Kinsale. I think, Michael, that's the correct one. Be in with a chance to win. Sean Mahon will announce the winner at the end of the event and will be presented by the Lord Mayor and Sean to the best and quirkiest tweet. Finally, we're delighted to announce a new tie-up with an American CPA firm to deal with American tax returns for US citizens. There are roughly 8 million Americans who live abroad, and unlike other countries in the world, the US demands its citizens to pay taxes on all foreign income. US citizens must file even if they haven't lived and worked abroad for decades, and even if they're already paying hefty taxes to the country in which they reside. Therefore, we've developed a good working relationship with a well-respected American CPA firm who will work with us in conjunction with filing US tax returns for our clients. Thanks to all our clients and contacts of the firm for your support in business. It is appreciated, and loyalty in business is important to us. I know you all didn't get up early this morning to listen to me speak, so I'll now pass you over to the main act of the morning. And I'm going to ask Tomás O'Brien, Chairman, to say a few words, followed by Paraic from the Big Red Cloud, and then Jim Power. We'd like to get your feedback, so please fill out the forms if you wouldn't mind, and there's a goodie bag for you on your exit with lots of giveaways from our sponsors. So thank you for coming along and enjoy your morning. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, Councillor Kevin Murphy, guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Chamber of Tourism and Business in Kinsale. I'm delighted to be here this morning to welcome you to our fantastic tourist town. It's also a great business town, and we're delighted, looking forward at projections for the year and bookings, that we're looking very busy for the year and into next year. Delighted you could all come here this morning, and I'd like to thank Cormac and from Fitzgerald and Partners and Kieran from the Blue Haven for this fantastic get-together here this morning, and all the sponsors here in front of me, Southern Star, Big Red Cloud, and I hope they all work well together. I think this is your second one here, or third one, second one for the Southern Star, and it's great to see all the West Cork businesses working together. So without further ado, Fáilte go Giuntala. I hope you have a great day. If anyone would like to join the Chamber in Kinsale that hasn't already joined, we have a few spots left. So I'll talk to you after breakfast. Thank you very much and enjoy the talk.
So delighted to be here on behalf of Bigger at Book and Bigger at Cloud, and delighted to sponsor the event this morning with Cormac and his team at Fitzgerald and Partners. Bigger at Book and Bigger at Cloud. Bigger Book has been in business for 21 years, providing accounting software to SMEs the length and breadth of Ireland. And in fact, 4 years ago, next Monday, we launched Bigger at Cloud in the Irish market. So it's our fourth birthday coming up, and we've in excess of 35,000 businesses in Bigger Book, and we're proud to say that we've generated just over 4,000 customers in Bigger Cloud in that 4 years. On a personal basis, I'm delighted to be back in Cork as a Corkman. I got to save my mother last night, and she reminded me that of some of my connections with Kinsale. 50 years ago, she was actually a nurse in the local hospital here. And I'm proud to announce that my sister has recently been appointed Director of Nursing in the community hospital here in Kinsale and starts in 2 weeks' time. So any of you who might interact with her, I hope you'll make her feel welcome in the community here. I'm also pleased to announce we do have a special offer in Bigger at Cloud. As Cormac mentioned, we have we're here afterwards for demonstrations if you want to see the product in action. On top of being on the finance side, I'm also in charge of the product. We have a deal for 3 years where we'll give you a free laptop. So for a 3-year subscription to Bigger at Cloud. So if anyone's interested in that, please feel free to come and talk to us afterwards. With that, I said I'm really only here to just say thanks for giving us the opportunity to sponsor this event. And I'd like to welcome Jim Power, leading economist, to give us his views on the very important topic of Brexit, which is an important one for all Irish businesses. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to breakfast here. It's kind of strange standing up here not eating turkey, but given that this normally happens in December. But I was sitting at home a few weeks ago, one night, kind of bored, wondering what I'd do, and I decided I'd love to visit Kinsale for a night. So contacted Cormac and suggested there's a crisis out there that his clients might want to hear about. So I have a total vested interest in this. So thanks, Cormac, for hosting this. I want to, first of all, before I start talking about the issues around Brexit, I just want to set the economic backdrop, or I suppose more importantly, update you on what has happened to the economy in the first 5 months of the year. I suppose I remember standing up here a couple of Christmases ago saying that I felt very confident that the following Christmas, if I was invited back, that the economic story on Ireland would be considerably better. And I think I said the same thing last December. And, definitely there is a story of continuing economic recovery coming through. I don't want to bombard you with a lot of statistics today, but it's a couple of points I just want to make about the economy. At the beginning of 2015, just over a year ago, the economy reattained the levels of activity that prevailed prior to the crisis. And since then, 2015, 5 months into 2016, it's clear that we've added about 10% to the size of the economy. And after 7 incredibly difficult years, and we've all lived through it, we had 8 budgets between 2008 and 2014 that took about 30 billion out of the economy. We had the virtual collapse of our banking system. And of course, we had the most difficult global environment that we've lived through since the 1930s. So having come through all of that as a small open economy, it's really positive that we have come out the other end, that the economy is coming back on track. And as I say, importantly, we have retained the levels of activity that prevailed prior to the crisis. That's not to suggest there are not challenges and risks out there. There still are. There is no doubt about that. Before I talk about those, of which Brexit is obviously the most imminent one, looking at what has happened in the world so far in 2016, undoubtedly since about last August, September, China has become the focus of market attention and has created a massive level of uncertainty. And you might say, so what? given that Ireland exports less than 2% of its total exports to China. So it's not a very significant trading partner for us. But I suppose the point is that China does a lot of business with a lot of countries that we do a lot of business with. So you could describe it as the process of globalization. The whole world is becoming increasingly interdependent. And with China struggling at the moment, that has created a lot of global uncertainty. The problem we all have with China is that we don't fully understand it. Because it's a command economy where the quality of the information you get out, it's difficult to know whether you can believe it and trust it or not. So it's hard to get a clear picture. But what we do know is that the economy has slowed significantly over the last 12 months particularly, and twice in the last 9 months or so, last August and again in January, the Chinese have devalued their currency to try and stimulate export growth. So that's a real indication that the Chinese authorities are worried about what's going on. So a major source of uncertainty, and certainly has created a pretty difficult investment environment. The other thing that we've seen so far in 2016, in April, the European Central Bank eventually cut its key interest rate to 0, and it implemented a negative bank deposit rate, which basically means that if banks put excess liquidity on deposit with the European Central Bank, they're charged for the privilege of doing so. And that is to try and encourage European banks not to hold liquidity, to try and lend it into the real economy. The European Central Bank also added 20 billion per month to their quantitative easing. What's all that about? Well, it really is an act of desperation on behalf of the European authorities. They're struggling to get any real economic momentum. And literally, it's a case of trying to throw the kitchen sink at the difficulties. And I suppose from an Irish perspective, if you're a borrower, it's a good environment. If you're on a tracker mortgage, it's an absolutely fantastic environment. If you're somebody with money on deposit in a financial institution or wherever, it's a dreadful environment. So, as is normally the case, there are winners and losers in this. But I suppose the key point is that European authorities continue to throw the kitchen sink in terms of policy at the European economy. And I think the one thing we can be pretty certain about is that this current historically low level of interest rates in the euro area and consequently in Ireland, will persist for the foreseeable future. And I'd be a bit surprised if I were back here this time next year and European central bank rates were any different than where they are today. And if they're different, I think it'll be very, very marginal. The unemployment rate coming down. Earlier this week, we discovered in April it fell to 7.9%. It was at 15.2% back in 2012. So the labour market moving in the right direction. And we also got employment numbers earlier this week showing in the year to the end of March, 47,000 net new jobs created in the economy. Car sales up 26% in the first 4 months of the year. Light commercial vehicles, which is a key indicator of business investment, and particularly the small business sector. Light commercial vehicle sales up 29%. Tax revenues growing in excess of 9%. Retail sales picking up quite strongly. So, as was the case last December, I would have said that over the previous 12 months, virtually every single economic indicator out of Ireland was moving in the right direction. And 5 months into 2016, that remains the case. So the economic momentum is still good. It continues to build. That's not to say, we should become complacent or that all of our problems are gone away. I mean, they're not. As a cautious conservative economist, I'd be very aware, perhaps too aware sometimes, of just the uncertainties that are still out there. I mean, the world economy is still a dangerous place. When the interest rate environment in Europe that I've just described, that the situation as it's evolving in China, the fact that government bond yields are now at the lowest level in 800 years, believe it or not, all of those circumstances are highly unusual and do indicate just how precarious the global economy still is following the collapse that started back in 2007, 2008. And I think another point worth making about Ireland's recovery story is that 4 external factors have been incredibly influential in driving the Irish recovery. Oil prices have fallen 65% in the last couple of years, and as an oil importing nation, that has been of major benefit to Ireland. But we've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and you'll see it reflected in the petrol and diesel pumps at the moment, oil prices starting to drift up again, and that's starting to impose upward pressure on petrol and diesel prices. But relative to where we were 2 years ago, prices are still very low. The second factor is the weakness of the euro. Over the last couple of years, the euro has been pretty much consistently weakening, or at least to the end of last year, the euro had been on a consistent downward trend against sterling and the dollar. And from the perspective of Irish exporters to the UK, from the perspective of US and UK tourists coming into Ireland, that has been of major benefit to us. The European Central Bank's interest rate policy, I've outlined, a zero interest rate policy, has been very good for borrowing in this country. And the fourth factor is, the US and UK economies have been doing pretty well over the last couple of years, and the UK certainly has surprised on the upside. So given our dependence on the United States for foreign direct investment, given the importance of the UK for indigenous exporters, and last year, for example, the UK accounted for 41% of our food exports, which is an incredibly important part of the non-Dublin economy, the agri-food sector. So given the strength of those two economies, it has certainly insulated Ireland from the lack of growth in the euro area. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that in the last couple of years, Ireland has been the beneficiary of 4 incredibly benign external circumstances that are totally outside of our control. And the challenge, of course, is that any of those could go in the opposite direction. And there are signs that we need to be a little bit concerned. As I say, oil prices are drifting up a little bit because the oil producers are starting to get their act together in terms of controlling supply. The euro has been gaining ground against sterling since last November, and I'll talk you through that in a second. ECB interest rate policy, no risks on that front at the moment. The strength of the US and the UK, still relevant, but in both economies in the last couple of months we have started to see some signs of softening. So I suppose my important message in this regard would be we have been very lucky over the last couple of years. External factors have certainly driven the economic recovery story, but we shouldn't get complacent. We need to be careful about how we handle it. The issues and challenges for Ireland, that external environment, as I say, a lot of uncertainties out there. Brexit, which I'll talk about in a second. The other big issue, of course, is housing. We know at a national level, and I suppose it's particularly concentrated in the greater Dublin area, but not just, we're certainly seeing a shortage of social housing, a shortage of owner-occupied housing, and a shortage of rental properties. And as a consequence, a housing crisis is definitely a term we're hearing an awful lot about. So over the next couple of years, we've obviously got to address that, and there's only one way to address it, that is to increase housing supply. Easier said than done. There's no single silver bullet solution. The solution to that housing problem is going to be a combination of a lot of different things. And if I had another hour and a half, I'd talk you through them, but I don't think you'd thank me for that. Another big challenge for us here as the recovery builds is the demand for better public services is growing dramatically. Health and law and order will be the two public services that come most readily to mind. The law and order thing has certainly been highlighted again over the last couple of days in Dublin. And we, on an ongoing basis, we hear issues about, we're aware of issues about the health service. So the point is that as a country, we are demanding better and better and more public services. The problem, of course, is that the improvement and delivery of better public services costs money, and there are still fiscal constraints out there. So it's a question of prioritisation. Another issue that is building, pay. Between 2007, 2008, and really about 2014, a lot of people took pay cuts, public and private sector. Now, with the economic recovery story well underway, pressures for wage increases are starting to build in both the public and the private sector. I would say that given the external uncertainties out there, given the other challenges we have, we do need to be very careful about controlling wage costs into the future, because the one thing we should have learned between 2000 and 2007 was that we let the wage costs get totally out of control. Another big issue that was highlighted during the election campaign and subsequently is the whole question of regional growth. Even the employment numbers that were released during the week, if you look down through the regional breakdown, it is clear that the Greater Dublin area is definitely still driving the recovery. Cork is doing better, Galway is doing better, but in many other parts of the country, certainly growth is an issue. And where I'm from in the southeast, it certainly is a big issue. And the southeast currently boasts having the highest unemployment rate in the country. In the first quarter, the average unemployment rate in the country was 8.4%. In the Mid-East, it was 12.9%. Incidentally, in the Southwest, it was under 8%. So this part of the world doing reasonably well. But regional growth and spreading the recovery is an issue. And I suppose the other big challenge is the political one. I spoke last December about the potential for political uncertainty ahead of the election. I think that has crystallised. We live in very strange political times, there was the vote in the Dáil last week giving the central bank legislative powers to force the banks to cut interest rates. I saw Michael O'Regan in the Irish Times describing the Dáil last Wednesday night as being like a circus. So the political scene here is complicated at the moment, and the problem, of course, is that in a recovering economy, confidence is obviously of key importance at both the business and the consumer level, and political uncertainty and instability is certainly not a recipe for confidence. So I've no idea how it's going to transpire, but we need to be a little bit careful about it. A slide I throw up because it shows you, the trend in taxation over the last few years, the various categories of taxation. And the one point I just want to make about it is that back in 2006, pre-crash, we had just over 2 million people working in the economy. They paid 12.4 billion in income tax, accounting for 27.2% of the total tax take. This year, 2016, we will have just over 2 million people on average working in the economy. They will pay 19 billion in income tax, accounting for over 40% of the total tax take. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that, over the last few years, the fiscal adjustment has fallen very heavily on the shoulders of people who work and pay income tax. So the burden has increased quite dramatically. And that, I think, is one of the reasons for many businesses still dealing with the consumer, the personal sector. Life is still challenging because the personal sector is still pressurised, not least because of the increase in the tax burden that has occurred. And, clearly during the election campaign, we did enter into a bit of a debate about whether we should be cutting taxes or investing in public services and so on. I think a combination is what we require. But anyway, the final point before I go on to talk about the Brexit issue, looking at the political backdrop and the policy backdrop at the moment, we a couple of weeks ago had a 160-page programme for government published. It ticks all the boxes, all of the areas like housing, health, climate change, public services, rural development. Have public services in there twice for some reason. Probably highlights the importance. I didn't make a mistake. But, all of those issues are clearly addressed in the programme for government. The problem, of course, is that it is incredibly aspirational, and there's a lot of sort of cut and paste from previous policies. But obviously, let me not be cynical about it. The proof of the pudding will be in how those issues are addressed in a real and meaningful way over the coming years, or depending how long the fragile government will actually last. In terms of public sector pay, there was emergency legislation called FEMPI introduced in 2009 when the economy got into an emergency situation. There is a legal obligation to reverse all of those FEMPI cuts over the next few years. So public sector pay bill is going to increase in any event. And obviously in an environment of fiscal constraints still, trying to balance increasing public sector pay with delivering better public services and addressing other issues like housing, it's a challenging political backdrop. Now, that's a quick snapshot of where we are as an economy, recovery story, but still lots of issues to think about externally and domestically, lots of challenges. An immediate challenge is obviously the Brexit referendum. A couple of years ago, David Cameron made a commitment that if he came back into government in a majority situation, he would hold a referendum on continued UK membership of the European Union. And people are now questioning, why did he do that? Was it a major mistake? Well, when he made that pledge a couple of years ago, I could certainly sympathise and understand with where he was coming from, because going back decades, even before the UK joined the European Union, or the Common Market as it was at the time, back in 1974, the UK relationship with the European Union was always, with Europe generally, was always very fractious. And for successive Tory leaders particularly, the relationship with Europe tore the party apart. Thatcher, John Major were two leaders that had particular difficulties trying to keep the party together, with Europe being the big issue of contention. So in a way, Cameron was motivated by trying to call the bluff of the pesky Eurosceptics. In other words, it's now time to stand up and make a call. We remain part of the European Union, we get out, but we've got to bring some certainty, get rid of all of these issues and uncertainty off the table. So that I think is the sort of political motivation. But if you look at the debate, the way it's transpired over there, there's a lot of talk about EU regulations, that Europe imposes a lot of regulation on the UK economy. Let's get away from that. There's also a lot of talk about budget contributions. In other words, how much money the UK pays into the EU budget. And the fact was that last year, the UK would have paid a gross 20 billion. It would have received back about 10 billion. So the net contribution, 10 billion. In the terms of the size of the UK economy, a net payment of 10 billion to the EU budget is not very significant. But yet, it'd be a lot of money in our context, but not in the context of the UK. But yet, it does attract an awful lot of talk and mention during this Brexit campaign. In terms of the EU regulations, the OECD did a study last year looking at regulation, the regulatory environment in the member countries, and it found that the UK within the European Union was still one of the least regulated countries in the European Union. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that two of the issues that are being highlighted by the Brexit supporters, regulation and budget contribution, they're not really issues for the UK. And I suspect that if Brexit were to happen, the regulatory environment wouldn't change very much, and I'll explain why that's the case. The other issue that's of concern in relation to Brexit at the moment is that, as I say, when Cameron called or pledged to hold a referendum a couple of years back, there was justification from a political justification from his perspective. But of course, the environment has changed dramatically since then. I suspect, and I firmly believe, back then he was convinced he would easily win such a referendum. But the environment has changed dramatically. And unfortunately, over the last 6 months, the campaign has become very focused on terrorism, following Paris and Brussels particularly, and also the EU, the Syrian migration crisis and the inability of the EU to deal with it. So quite simply, and I think simplistically, the Brexit people are arguing that if you want to protect Britain from this migration crisis, if you want to protect Britain from the possibility of terrorist attacks, it'd be easier to do it independently outside of the European Union. So, as I say, unfortunately, the debate has changed and it's become embroiled in these much murkier issues. And as a consequence, the opinion polls have closed in dramatically. The last poll of polls I saw show the Remain side were about 2% ahead of the Exit side, with still a lot of undecideds. So the stakes have become very high, and my gut instinct all the time, and it remains my gut instinct, but the instinct is being dimmed as time goes on, is that when push comes to shove, the British electorate would vote to stay in, on the basis that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And that was what happened in the Scottish referendum this time last year. Despite what the opinion polls were shown, when it came to polling day, the majority made the decision that what we know is better than what we don't know, and the risks of Scotland leaving the European Union was deemed too high to contemplate. My gut instinct all along has been that a similar thing would happen in relation to the Brexit referendum, but I wouldn't be notorious for my political calls, so that will be answered on June 23rd, June 24th. Sterling has been under a bit of pressure, excuse me, as a result, and I'll talk about sterling in a second because it's very important for Ireland. In the first quarter, UK land prices and land sales fell quite sharply because investors in agricultural land in the UK correctly recognised that outside of the European Union, EU support for agriculture would disappear and agriculture would become much less profitable unless the UK government were to step in and make up the shortfall for Europe, which I think is unlikely to happen. So land prices being reflected. 47% of UK exports go to the UK, to the EU market, and 7% of EU exports go into the UK. So I suppose the point is that the EU is a very important trading market for the United Kingdom. A couple of facts. You know, if Britain were to vote on June 23rd to exit, it is inconceivable that the EU would allow Britain have full access to the EU market without taking on board any of the drawbacks. So I'll talk about possibilities in a second, but the point is that if Britain votes to leave, and if Britain wants then to get free access to the EU market, it will have to sign up to the regulations that it's trying to get away from. It will have to continue to make a budget contribution that it's also trying to get away from. So in a nutshell, I think the economic part of the debate on EU membership does not make any sense whatsoever, and I think Britain would be mad to leave. But, you know, politics certainly has taken over from economics in recent times, but I'll elaborate on those issues in a second. The other fact is that when the Treaty of Rome was signed in 1957, which created the European, the common market at the time on the 1st of January 1958, the basis of that was to create a zone where you would get the free movement of goods, people and capital between the member countries of the bloc. And as we know that since then, the bloc has extended dramatically in size, with Britain, Ireland, Denmark coming on board, for example, in 1974. So that's what the EU is based on. That's what it's all about. Free movement of goods, people and capital. So the question is, if you were outside the European Union, would you still get that free movement of goods, people and capital? We don't know the answer yet, but I'll talk about the possibilities. And what will determine what actually happens if on June 23rd Britain votes to exit. A process of disengagement from the European Union will then begin. In other words, negotiations between the European Union and Britain on what the future relationship will be. There are possibilities, there are models out there, there are templates. Norway has access to the European Union markets through the European Economic Area, but for the privilege of getting access to EU markets, Norway has to pay about 90% of the UK contribution per capita, per head of population. Okay, Switzerland has a series of bilateral trade deals with the European Union, and it pays about 50% of the UK contribution per head of population. So, and both countries, to access the EU market, as well as continuing to make a budget contribution to the EU, they also have to sign up to many of the rules and regulations of the single European market. So the point is that outside of the European Union, you cannot expect to gain all the advantages of free trade in goods, people and capital without having to sign up to the rules and regulations of the bloc. And I think that's something that is being missed by the Brexit side in the campaign. Canada is another example outside of Europe. It recently completed a free trade deal with the European Union, but services are not included and all goods are not included. So it's a limited trading arrangement. But I suppose from a UK perspective, the fact that services are not part of it would be a big issue. So those are the possibilities, and we can't answer definitively at this stage what would be likely to happen, but the negotiation process will start. It could take years to conclude, and during which time presumably Britain would remain part of the European Union, but eventually, you would have to come up with some sort of solution. And as I say, I'd be very clear. I think I'm no Europhile, but I think Britain would be mad from an economic perspective, particularly to vote to leave the system. But I don't think what I believe will have much impact on what the UK electorate does on the 23rd of June. Looking at the economic impact on the UK, obviously there's a question mark over UK future trade relations with the European Union, but inconceivably, in the short term at least, it would damage UK trade. Lower budget contribution, as I say, if Britain outside the European Union wants to access the EU market, it will still have to make significant budget contributions. What impact will it have on inward investment? Inevitably, many of the US companies that invest in the UK, and the UK has an incredibly vibrant foreign direct investment model. What impact would it have? A lot of US companies particularly come into the United Kingdom because they speak English and it gives them access to the EU market. So if that access didn't exist post-Brexit, definitely would have an impact. Lower regulations, would the regulatory environment change significantly outside the European Union? No, it wouldn't. So the British electorate would be mad to believe that they would wake up on June 24th and suddenly find the whole regulatory environment having changed dramatically. Migration, it's clear, and particularly if you visit the City of London, it's just clear the very positive impact EU migration particularly has had on the UK economy. EU nationals play a key role in driving the UK economy, particularly in the southeast and the financial services sector. So any possibility that those migratory flows would be damaged by Brexit certainly would not be good news. So I think, whatever way you look at it, a vote to leave would be bad news for the UK economy. The question is, how bad would it be? And that will ultimately be determined by what sort of relationship Britain agrees with the European Union. Longer term, obviously, Britain would adjust. It would have to adjust. Economies do adjust. When you're hit with a shock, there's a short-term issue. Longer term, you adjust and you get on with it, and we get back to some sort of normality. But certainly, the short-term risks for the UK are significant. Now, that's the UK story. What are the implications for Ireland? Well, I don't know, because we won't know until we see what sort of trade deal is agreed between Britain and the European Union. But we do know certain things. I mean, the UK is still an incredibly important trading partner of Ireland's on the import and the export side. Last year, we exported 15.5 billion in goods and around 23 billion in services to the UK. We imported 17.8 billion and in physical goods, and service imports about 12 billion. And for Irish industry, that is non-multinational industry operating in Ireland, they export 53% of what they produce, and 44% of that goes to the UK market. And an area that is particularly dependent on the UK is the agri-food sector. And as I said earlier, last year, the UK accounted for 41% of our agri-food exports. So the point is, Britain is an incredibly important trading partner for Ireland, despite the diversification that has happened since we joined the single European currency on January 1st, 1999 without Britain. It remains a very important trading partner. And obviously, any barriers to that trade would damage us. Obviously, any slowdown in the UK economy would damage us. So from a trade perspective, certainly lots of downside for Ireland in the short term. Other issues, land border with Northern Ireland. You know, what would Brexit imply? Would border controls go back up? And given the progress that we've made since the 90s in terms of peace in Northern Ireland and greater political unification on the island, you know, the re-emergence of a real land border with border controls certainly politically and economically would be very difficult. We also, whether you realise it or not, we have an all-island energy market, particularly electricity. So the implications for that, you know, two parts of an island in two different political regimes, one inside the EU, the other outside it, you know, what are the implications for the maintenance of that market? UK corporate tax policy. The UK authorities have already committed to getting their corporation tax rate down to 18% over the next couple of years, compared to 12.5% here. Is there a possibility outside of the European Union that Britain would go much more aggressively on the corporation tax front to try and compensate for the fact that it wouldn't be part of the European Union? Definitely. So you could well see the UK over the coming years replicating our corporation tax structure, for example, outside of the European Union. No problem in doing that. And I think another really big issue for Ireland is we would lose a very important like-minded ally around the EU table. One of the things we learned from the banking inquiry was that in the run-up to the bailout here, the Troika bailout at the beginning of 2011, the French and the Germans were trying to make it a precondition for accessing that funding that we would change our corporation tax rate. And we won that debate, obviously, we won that argument, but Britain was a major ally of Ireland's in that battle, because the British, like ourselves, believe that taxation should be a national competency, not something dictated by the European Union. So my fear would be that without Britain at the EU table, Ireland becomes much more vulnerable. On the upside, we would become, and this is technically not strictly correct because Malta is an English-speaking country, but effectively Ireland would become the only English-speaking country in the European Union. So that could possibly benefit us from a foreign direct investment perspective. For US companies particularly who want to invest in an English-speaking country with access to the European Union, obviously with Britain gone, Ireland could benefit. And the IDA, I know, has been talking to people in the City of London, sort of pointing out that in the event of Brexit, you might consider locating to Dublin. And I know a couple of banks have done something about that in recent times. So we could benefit to some degree, but I still feel the negatives would far outweigh any positives in the short term at least. And then there is the bigger issue about the implications. I'm almost there, folks, okay, I swear. The implications for the European Union. I would fear, the European Union as a structure is under serious pressure. the ability to deal with the financial crisis since 2007 has been poor. The ability of the EU to deal with the migration crisis has been worse than poor. It has been very fractured. So the EU as a construct is stressed. There's no doubt about that. And if Britain were to leave, I think the EU would be fundamentally weakened. But it would also create a dangerous precedent, because the single European currency was held together by a belief in its irreversibility. And that's why policymakers in the Eurozone bent over backwards to make sure, against all logic, that Greece would remain part of the single European currency. Because if one country were to leave, it creates a precedent and others could follow. Likewise with the European Union, if Britain left, it would raise the spectre a year or two down the road. The Italians might decide Britain's doing okay outside the European Union, why not? So the whole thing, I think, could be potentially destabilised, and I think it would be a major challenge for the EU to keep it together following a Brexit. In terms of the currency bit, as I mentioned earlier on there, that the decline we saw in sterling in 2014 to November 2015, the decline in the euro against sterling, the strengthening of sterling, we went from the mid-80s down to 68, 69 cent by last October, November. Incredibly positive for Ireland in terms of our export performance and in terms of UK tourists coming in. But between November, as Brexit risk started to raise its head, it's not the only reason, but it was a key reason. Between November of last year and up to 2 or 3 weeks ago, sterling had lost 15% of its value against the euro. We'd gone from 68, 69 up to just under 82. And in the last couple of weeks, we've seen sterling gain a little bit of ground, and yesterday it was under 76 pence again. So that's moving the right direction once. But I suppose the point is, I shouldn't say I have no doubt, because one should always have doubt about future currency movement. But my strong suspicion would be that if Brexit risk were to increase over the coming weeks, and if Britain were to leave the system, you could easily see sterling in the short term losing 15% plus of its value. So from an Irish export perspective, from an Irish tourism perspective, that would be good. That would not be good news. So in other words, the short-term future of sterling is going to be heavily driven by Brexit risk. And suffice to say that at this juncture, along with the bookies, the financial markets are virtually totally unconcerned about Brexit. If you look at UK bond yields, if you look at the UK equity market so far this year, if you look at the performance of sterling over the last 2 or 3 weeks, sending out a strong message. The markets do not believe Brexit is going to happen and are very relaxed about it. So in the event of a shock, if Brexit were to happen, you would certainly see a lot of financial market volatility in the UK. And as I say, sterling would be a major victim. So finally, what can Ireland do about it? Well, not a lot. We're hearing a lot of noise in recent days about contacting our friends and relatives who live in the UK to tell them to vote to stay in. We've had Enda Kenny over there a few months back trying to persuade the British electorate to vote to stay in. Given that he couldn't persuade his own electorate to do certain things, I'm not sure about that. But anyway, there's not an awful lot we can do about it. But it's a fact the UK is still a very important trading partner of Ireland's. It's a fact that we still have a lot of movement of people from the UK to Ireland and vice versa. And there is no doubt about it that if Brexit were to occur, it would cause immense uncertainty for trade, for people flows, and for currency movements. Some people say, well, all we have to do is sign bilateral trade deals with Britain to maintain the current trading relationship. The fact is that for an EU country to sign a bilateral trade deal with a non-EU country, you have to get every other member country to agree. And the problem there would be that I think a lot of European countries, particularly France and Germany, would be very peed off with the UK if they voted to leave. So I'm not sure how amenable they would be to doing anything that would remotely help the UK. So, cantankerous politics could become the name of the game. So trade diversification is another response. We make ourselves a lot less dependent on the UK. That argument was made back in '99 when we joined the single European currency, and there has been some diversification. But the fact is that from an Irish exporter perspective, the UK is still the easiest market to access. Culturally, from a business perspective, very, very similar models. So to tell Irish food and drink exporters, for example, to forget about the UK, to focus on other markets, is easier said than done, because it's a good market for Ireland. So given that we can't do anything about it, and this refers to Brexit, but it refers to all of those other external risks I talk about. The key for Ireland is to make sure that our economy is as stable, as resilient, our public finances are as good as possible, our competitiveness is as good as possible. Because if you can create those conditions, your ability to deal with an external shock, in other words, your economic resilience, is much stronger. And we should have learned the lesson that back in 2007, when we were hit with an external tsunami, our ability to deal with it was non-existent because of the manner in which we'd managed the economy up to 2007. So in the context of this whole Brexit risk, we just need to make sure our economy is as flexible and competitive as possible to deal with that. Finally, my gut instinct, as I say, is that it ain't going to happen, that Britain will remain part of the European Union. But, as you know, with referenda, there are always inherent risks involved, because they're often used as an opportunity to have to kick the government. But if you think about, I didn't mention global politics, but if you think about this scenario, Britain votes to leave. Cameron could not conceivably remain as leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister. Who would he be replaced by? Boris Johnson. So you just think about Boris Johnson running the UK, Donald Trump running the United States, and Putin running Russia. You might want to consider moving to China, which is politically stable. Thank you very much for your attention.
Just say thank you very much. Again, great mornings. I suppose really start the morning with Jim Power's thoughts. It's just fantastic. Of course, he did leave out Just Think of It. So we have Donald Trump, Boris, Enda. No, we'll stop it at that. Okay, but no, as always, thanks to Cormac and Fitzgerald's Partners for again a very enlightening, I suppose, opportunity to network, but also to listen to very thoughtful debate in many respects, and to look at the threats. And Jim, thanks as always. You do provide a lot of provocative thoughts in many respects, in a good way, may I say. But again, thanks to the sponsors. I think it's a great event and a great privilege for myself. And well done, and keep up the good work. Good Mila Mahagud.
Thank you. So that concludes this morning. Thanks again, everybody, for coming along. And don't forget your goodie bag when you leave, and safe home. And thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming along this morning. It was an excellent event that we hosted with the Brexit briefing with Jim Power, leading economist, sponsored by the Big Red Cloud, leading supplier of accounts online software, and our media partners, the Southern Star, which was an excellent event and trended very well, and very good feedback from the event. We also had a lot of members here from the Kinsale Chamber of Tourism and Business, kinsale.ie, which is an important organisation for the town. So we're delighted with the outcome of the event and the feedback that we've got from it. Thank you.